Again, okay, cool. So what we're going to do over the next hour or so is give you a short overview of the transition bounce forward seed funding. This is myself and Nicola are going to be steering our way through this with Mike helping with links and whatnot this time round. We're going to give you that short overview and the thinking behind how it was built this way. So try and get you kind of inside the fund a little bit and help you to feel like you own the process for seed funding. So when you look at it after this meeting and talk with your groups, you feel like, actually, do you know what? I can go in there and I know my way around. It feels like my process. We're going to reshare all the links and social media contacts we encourage you to sign up to. So we'll do that at the end. You've already had it a couple of times, so I hope you're getting into that. And we're going to do 10 minutes of breakout discussion, which hopefully will work fine this time round for everybody. Just so you can have a bit of time to digest what we've said, maybe look at the form, maybe share ideas about what you might put forward for seed funding, or maybe answer each other's questions. Because yes, Nicola and I know quite a lot about it, but actually the more empowered you feel to kind of work together as a community of transitioners, the better. Then we'll come back after that and have a good old 25 minutes to answer as many questions as we can. We're going to ask you at that point, we'll remind you to put the questions in the chat so that then we can capture them and form like a frequently asked questions page on the website for the project. So we can really use this webinar to help others ask their questions and find the answers that they need to apply to the funding opportunity. I'll say that we've been trying, a few people have pointed out that we haven't been able to allow you as participants to message each other in the chat, which is a usual function on Zoom. We've been beavering away trying to release that permission, but we haven't been able to find it. So we're just going to have to leave that for now. At the end of the meeting, again, if you're comfortable, if you're seeing people who are the same area as you or you'd like to connect with, perhaps just do at the end of the meeting, you can, if you feel comfortable to, you can share your contacts in the chat, which everybody will see. I'm sure everyone's cool on this call. Yeah, we can find another way to connect you, but apologies, you can't direct message each other within the chat today. That's it, I think. So Mike, if you're there, yeah, you just put Nicola's just put the link in for the All You Need to Know doc. So for this section, it might be worth, what we're going to do for the next 10 minutes or so is talk through that All You Need to Know document. It's a 6-page document that we hope covers the lion's share of stuff that you need to know to apply to the seed funding. But we're going to kind of steer you through it and then give you what the thinking was behind each section and some of the background so that you kind of know the reasoning of it as well, if that makes sense. So the first section of seed funding is the introduction to it. I'm going to hand over, Nicola and I are going to do this like a duo. So I'm going to hand over to Nicola for this little bit here.
Are we going to, we are going to screen share the document, even better. There you go. Well, it starts by saying thank you to the National Lottery Community Fund, which is a really important thing to say because it's thanks to them that we can sort of fulfill this dream in a way of being able to do something, a small amount, but something towards that sort of situation of really needing to build capacity in the transition movement. So yeah, thanks to those people who play the National Lottery. There is money from the National Lottery Community Fund that's part of their funding of work that can kind of strengthen community groups in this time of COVID-19 and help us to kind of build our society from this situation as well. Yeah, and it was just an opportunity for us to say, well, why is there seed funding as part of this project in the first place? And, you know, it's fair to be saying we've been doing quite a lot of research, asking you surveys to the transition movement here, there and everywhere, events, feedback from events. And what we hear a lot is this, how important some funding is to unlock the work that you do. You know, that this idea of capacity, it does, you know, so this £140,000 for seed funding obviously is, you know, not enough to solve all of the capacity dreams that we could have in the transition movement, but it's a help. It's something that can help. And yeah, we've got, Richard will explain later a bit of a philosophy of trying to see if we can spread that £140,000 as far as possible. When we started applying to the National Lottery Community Fund for this, their COVID funds covered the UK, but during that their organisation meant that actually that funding was restricted to England only. So this seed funding is only, I'm afraid, available for English transition groups. This time, who knows, this could be a practice run for something much better in the future. I think that's me on that section.
Fantastic. So the next section is what's on offer. So essentially, Nicola was saying we have 140,000 quid to get to you folks to do great work where you are. So this should be a Christmas quiz question. How many transition groups are there in England without going to the Transition Network map? There's over 200 groups in England. So 140 grand sounds like quite a lot, but if you spread it evenly over 200 groups, you can see it kind of gets thin quite quick. But through the consultation, through a mini consultation with transitioners, when we're developing the Transition Bounce Forward project, we decided to make two grant amounts available. So 140 microgrants of up to 500 quid, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit, and 20 full grants of up to £3,500. Why? Because small grants can be meaningful. They can benefit, and the benefit is spread much, much further if we do small grants, which we're really keen to do, support as many groups as possible, particularly this crazy year. We can also, with small grants, be ultra light touch. So we'll talk about the application process in a minute. And it really, really is light touch. We're asking for a paragraph about your project. Well, as I say, we'll come back to that later. But really light touch, and the £500 amount enables us to do that a little bit. So things to highlight, as I said, 140 microgrants available. Really want to support all eligible applications. So we're going to cover eligibility in this talk a little bit. Not much there, but essential. So you can be flexible with the amount you're asking for to make allowance if we're oversubscribed. So imagine if we had over 200 groups apply for the microgrants. Wondering, as you're conjuring what you might apply to, is there a chance to be flexible so everyone can get some of it should they be eligible for the grant? So we're talking like, could 500 be 400 quid and still do what you need it to do? I know there's a bit of a kind of paradox about that, but it's just a keenness to try and get a little bit of money to everybody to make the impact really spread across the country. So for both microgrants and full grants, if you have more than one application to put in, we'll be asking you to prioritize your projects, and we'll focus on funding the top priorities for everyone first. So does that make sense? So if you have 3 projects you might want to put in, or 2, then the top one will get considered first. So we get that geographical spread of projects supported across the country before we come back round and maybe look at the second priority projects. Back to Nicola.
So Mike, could you move on to the next section, the overview. It's an overview, there you go, lovely table. It's just to say that those application forms are open now, and the closing date for both of them, the microgrants and the full grants, is the end of Monday, 30th of November. So you've got the rest of November essentially. And yeah, there's a couple of applications already in and they look really good. So yeah, when in the first 2 weeks of December, we'll be looking at all the applications and hopefully we'll be able to let you know what's happening one way or the other by the end of December. And again, this is something that's come from the National Lottery Community Fund, but everything, the work that you're doing, it all has to be completed by the end of September 2021. So you can do it earlier, but it has to be done by then, one way or another. So just below this, there's a section that says what can be funded. I don't know if you can scroll down so we can see all the 5 bullet points there. This was our list of different types of project or work that this could fund, and as you look at it, it's really broad. And our philosophy that was here, it started from thinking about the philosophy behind the whole Transition Bounce Forward project, and from the National Lottery Community Fund of wanting to support community groups to respond to COVID and also to work towards a better society from this situation that we're in. So the first one of this, of course, is what we've been talking about in the first half tonight. Transition, trying to visualize what we want, explore what we'd like to transition to. So the first type of project is around, it might be paying for facilitation or organization of local and regional visioning processes. So it could give you the resources to run that what if visioning process that we talked about in the first half in a really nice way. It could be a different type of visioning process. Doesn't have to be that one. The second bullet point there, obviously community resilience has proved really important in this year. And, we want to support existing projects or new projects that relate to local resilience. And there are some examples in that list of local economy or community resilience, neighbourhood mutual support for disadvantaged groups, local food growing. And I think there's a lot of weight on those words of and more. So we might not have listed it. You tell us what's important for your group and community right now, that, because I think so much of what transition does really speaks to everything that's needed in these times of COVID. That third category there is general capacity support for transition groups to continue if this COVID-19 situation has made it more difficult. Let's not pretend that everything just keeps going unaffected. Actually, really just general basic capacity support might be the most important thing for your group right now, so that you've got a chance of re-emerging in better times. Let's try and keep the value that your group has created for your community. Can we keep this in place? Can one of these small grants help that? The fourth one there has come up, I think, in some of the discussions and things that we've seen posted in the chat, how important it is, this theme of transition groups working in partnership with their local authorities to increase the impact that we can have around climate emergency, around social justice, around mutual aid, around responding to COVID. So that we've mentioned that. And the final one there is about supporting peer mentoring across all of those types of projects. Because, properly valued peer mentoring is another theme that we've really heard for a long time. There's so many people in the transition movement who've they've got some really hard-won, excellent experience. And if you'd like to value the time of somebody from another transition group who, by paying for their advice and accompaniment through one of these grants, then this is an opportunity to do that. So that's the broad overview. Having said all of these huge things that we could fund, I just have to share with you that I really hate saying no. So, don't send in millions of pounds worth of projects because you're going to break my spirit. That was my personal plea for sanity. But then I'm going to pass on to Richard.
Fantastic. So I hope that's really set your brains whirring and really hit home with some of the things that you're doing where you are. So I'm just going to talk about the most exciting bit, eligibility criteria. There's only 3 things to go through here. One is, we've mentioned already, this fund is coming from National Lottery Community Fund money that is part of their England portfolio. So it's for England groups and England transition groups only. However, there's a big spirit of encouraging you to collaborate because, hey, as a member of Transition Town Tooting, I know if we did stuff in isolation in Tooting, it wouldn't go half as far as when we create partnerships and collaborations with other groups. So the application needs to come from a transition group in England, but collaborations for sure, absolutely, collaborating with other groups, absolutely sure. Perhaps even across the Scottish border, who knows? The other element is about being registered on the Transition Network site. So I'm just going to copy and put this link into the chat. If you're not registered already, then just zip onto the site and become registered. It doesn't take long. It's at underneath the map there, you may have seen. And it just is one of those requirements for the fund. And the second one is about the grant needs to be paid into a group bank account that requires at least 2 unrelated people to approve all transactions and withdrawals. So this is just a bit of due diligence from our point of view. We can't give the money into a personal bank account. So if that's the way you roll at the minute, because your group is small, because you haven't got that kind of incorporated structure of any sort or organizational structure in your group, then perhaps you know of a group who has a structure in a bank account that you could perhaps knock on the door of and say, hey, do you mind if we use your bank account to hold this details? Or there's this thing called, which I'm not too familiar with, but another way of doing it is called opencollective.com, which is a kind of online way to ring fence money for a particular project. So we could perhaps look at that way too. The bottom line on this criteria is if there's any barrier to you applying to the fund because of the kind of accounting setup of your group, get in touch and we'll try and find a way around it. We don't want this to be a barrier to you doing what you need to do where you are, but we just need to exercise that bit of due diligence, I guess. The final thing I'm going to talk about in this section is we mentioned transition principles quite a few times in this. And to be honest, in this project, it's been really a cool experience reconnecting with them after working in Transition Town Tooting for a while. So I'm just going to read this to you because this is kind of important to understand. So we were challenged a few times, for example, by the National Lottery, on how we will know that a group applying is a genuine transition group. As you know, it's a bottom-up movement and we work on trust. So this piece has come from seeing the transition principles as a general guide to recognizing a transition project or group. So that's kind of what we're talking about there. We're saying that you folks know those principles reasonably well and practice a good number of them and certainly aspire to kind of buying into the transition methodology. What we're not asking for in the funding application particularly is a whole exhaustive list of how your project really hits every single criteria, every single principle. It would just imagine reading 140 of them for one, it would take too long and we wouldn't be able to get the money to you. But in being a transition group, what we're assuming is that you kind of sign up to those principles. I think that's all I'm going to say on the principles. I hope that's good to understand, and I'll dig out a link to pop in the chat about the principles if you haven't reconnected with them recently yourself. Back to you, Nicola.
Okay, so I think we're going to have a look at the microgrants section, Mike. Cool, thank you. And in the chat, that's the link to the form for the microgrants. Yeah, we've been trying to make this process as easy as possible because nobody likes applying for money or writing anything in forms. Nobody likes that. So, and also, you know, these microgrants are very small. So really, to apply for the microgrants, all you just have to tell us is a one line, what's the name of the project, and then just a very brief single paragraph, just explain it what it is. So we also, in the spirit of being as inclusive as possible, if writing and typing is a problem to you, then we can accept those applications in audio form or video form, just covering the same questions that you'd find in the form. That's all that I can say about the microgrants. Over to you, Rich.
Thank you. So the full grants. So although the full grants are a bit more involved, we've kept this process as light as we possibly can too, and highlighting certain areas that we feel are particularly important in doing projects today. And I'm just going to pop a link in there. You've got the full grant form. Thanks, Nicola. So again, you can either fill out this form online, or if written English is a barrier to you, you can do a video or an audio file and get it to us that way too, using kind of the software that we know, making videos and maybe sharing a restricted YouTube video with us or something like that. I'm going to pull in Nick Arnim here to talk about, who's part of our team, to talk about the first of these criteria for allocating funds. So if Mike, could you scroll down a little bit more on your screen share. And Nick, I can't see everyone on the call. Are you here, mate?
I am.
Fantastic. So yeah, over to you, Nick. I'll let you introduce yourself there, mate.
Okay, so I'm Nick Hannim and part of Transition Town Brixton, and I'm working with Transition Bounce Forward in terms of inclusion and diversity, trying to bring the issues up and increase inclusion and diversity within transition towns in general. So what we're thinking is that if and when and where possible, inclusion and diversity should be really baked into everything that we do as a movement, to try and reach out to people within our different localities that we normally perhaps wouldn't engage with. Why are we doing that? Well, basically, if we are to succeed as a movement and catalyze the necessary societal changes that we need in order to get a formed, then we have to be more inclusive as a movement, really. And this is something we've recognized, and this is in fact why I've joined the project and really excited about that. So we reach beyond our normal and natural allies and engage with issues in our local areas that we may not normally sort of engage with. And we often talk about inclusion and diversity. My focus really, I often think that inclusion is almost more important than diversity, because with diversity, once you hit a certain target, it might be representative fraction of people in your area, in different marginalized groups, then you think your job is done. But as any local movement or any local initiative, I think you should make people feel welcome, make people feel more involved in the process. So if you can reach out to more people, I think that would really benefit your application and yourself and the project in effect. So again, I want to echo or reiterate what Richard just said, that we must try to create partnerships and collaborations. Yes, Richard's talking about different regions, but I'm talking about within your locality. You should really try to create partnerships and collaborations that reflect the needs of the area, really. So I think I'll end it there, Rich. Thanks.
Fantastic. Brilliant. The other couple things in the criteria to highlight there is the project demonstrating transition principles. So this is for the full grant. So we're encouraging short paragraphs on each of these sections. And finally, a little bit about the capacity of your group to take on that project. So just fully aware that there are a million ideas out there for us all to do in our communities. And they're all really, really calling out to be done and calling out for need where you are, but just want to have a moment to check in on your own capacity to do it. So just have a think about that and just kind of put that into your application a little bit. So that's pretty much the criteria, and you can see the weighting there as well. So trying to be as transparent as possible with that when we get to scoring the full grants. And again, for transparency purposes, there's the decision-making group. You've now met everyone who's listed there on this call. So we're just going to review the key dates and then give you a chance to digest this information and perhaps exchange with others what this fund means for you before we come back and answer any kind of questions in a group plenary type format. So key dates.
Do you want to scroll down, Mike?
Good call. I was looking at my notes screen rather than that, so good call. Thank you. The key dates that we're looking at here. The application deadline is the very end. That was my OCD-ness putting 11:59 p.m. if you're a deadline junkie, on November the 30th, 2020, so the end of this month. If there's something more that we need to ask you about of your project, then we'll ask. So it's that in that spirit. So be as complete as you can, but if something isn't clear, then we'll come back and ask you about it. We'll tell you in December. We've got a 2-week window to digest all of the applicants, and we'll tell you after that whether you've been successful or not. And we'll look to make payments in early January. So hopefully you can go into perhaps an end of year break thinking we're rolling with this project when we come back in January. Your project will need to be completed by the end of September 2021. And that time and date comes from the National Lottery Community Fund. So it's just to do with lining all that stuff up about when projects complete. So the couple things we'll ask from you. So if you're successful, before the end of the project, we'll ask you to do a little bit of feeding back. Now, this is a little bit about amplifying stories. So there is an element of us saying to the funder, hey, these are all the cool things that we've funded. But there's also a bigger narrative coming on here about building the transition movement, really getting to know what each other is doing and sharing these stories online in various ways. So if you can do, for example, a short video that we can share on Twitter about your project, then that would be really, really awesome. So we'll figure out ways for you to share. We'll also inevitably be asking for where are you up to kind of interim reports in March. And again, this is so we can just keep our funder informed about what's happening, and also check in if there's been any issues with you, or indeed if projects have developed since the award of grant. That's another thing that can happen with projects as well. So we might need to check in. So it's quite healthy to have a moment just for us to get back to you and ask about that. Now then, this is the end of our document, so I'm just going to make sure that there's nothing else to say. There's some of the administration stuff there, and those details in our emails, particularly Nicola and I, who you can message if you have any questions that we haven't covered following this webinar this evening. But that is the end of our kind of overview flyby through the seed funding.
I could kick off on one which was already there about the bank's charity account. If your charity bank account can have more than one signatory but doesn't require 2 signatories on checks, is that a problem? No, that's not a problem. That's a charity account with more than one signatory, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we need. This is really to avoid it going into an individual's bank account. That's all. So, and now I see there are some questions.
So the next one is from Marilyn in Kingston. So would we be required to assess the success of the project afterwards? Always a tougher ask for small voluntary groups. What do you think in terms of storytelling with that, Nicola?
I think that we just want you to assess its success in your own terms. You know, tell us quite humanly what happened and what you consider to be its success or not. We're not asking you to do sort of formal measurements and things like that. It's only going to be brief feedback, so we can kind of get a flavour and a big picture of everything that happened.
Again, this fund is for transition groups, so in a way the frame of it and direction of it is to groups that we trust have signed up to these principles and are part of our family in a way. So that idea of success, it's not like, sometimes it's a check as to see if you've done what you've said you would do or achieved the goals that you set out to achieve. And it's a little bit of a game of not trusting, perhaps. So this is set up a little bit more like, hey, we really want to just enable you to do because we believe you're going to do it, you know, not in a naive way, but in a way of going, we are a transition family and we do this because usually voluntarily. So it's not, you know, it's like we've stepped into this space of activism to make a better future for future generations, quite simply. So there's that element to it as well. So go on, Nicola, we'll do this one by one.
Okay, there's a question about, for the microgrant application, what level of detail around costings do we need? We don't need quotes and estimates. You don't need to go and get quotes and estimates. We just want you to give us a simple indication. I think we'll spend about this much on that and about this much on that. I mean, that kind of goes for the full one as well. Just tell us in really human terms, you know, facilitation of this much, organisation of that much, rent of this, whatever it is, you know.
And I guess, to be honest, the folk on the, when we get to that decision-making point, are transitioners as well. So if there's something we want to ask you about, then we'll come and ask you about it, you know, and that'll be pure curiosity. So yeah. John, how you doing, John and Bewdley? So what feedback will be required regarding the success of individual projects? I think we've covered that already. Pop it back in, John, if you feel we haven't covered that for you. And then Jackie up in Penrith in Cumbria. This is great, nice spread across the country. Our group is currently receiving lottery funding for a project. Can we still apply to your fund for a different piece of work? I think the answer.
Yes, you can. Yeah. Can we have lost this one from Sherry? Where's it gone? Can we use the money to cover people's time? Yes. It's not restricted to anything. Absolutely use it to cover people's time. What a brilliant thing to cover.
I'd also say on that quickly that as we've gone along conjuring this and slowly put it out there, there has been, I've already heard stories of people saying, hey, this year's been really difficult and a little bit of money would enable us to keep going. So really simple stories like that as well. And that's exactly, was exactly part of the reasoning to do the microgrants bit, just to enable stuff to happen. And indeed the full grants if that's supporting something larger. Okay, and the next one. So from Joe, Crystal Palace. What's up, Joe? Good friend of mine. Can a group apply for the smaller amounts and simultaneously apply for the larger amounts for a more expanded version of the same project? Cool question. To ensure they get the smaller amount. Wow.
I'd say yes. What a good idea. That sounds very sensible to me.
There you go.
Are funding applications restricted to the transition group applying, or can applications support a joined up approach to projects with other organisations in the community? I think we like a joined up approach to projects with other organisations in the community.
Absolutely. That calls to what Nick was saying as well, and what I was saying about collaboration and, you know, perhaps co-creating these ideas of actually let's address something quite difficult, a new relationship or a completely different approach that really addresses how our community is made up. So yeah, for sure. Marcus in Chepstow, right on the border there. Can any of the funding be contributions towards group core funds, insurance, website hosting, etc.? I mean, I'd say, you know, if that is something that is stopping you doing what you want to do, this is what this fund is for. So this is to support you doing what you want to do. So the answer is yes.
Can the completion date for projects be extended? If it's a big project, September might be too soon. We can't do that one. We worked really hard to get this date as late as September 2021 because the National Lottery Community Fund would preferred it to be earlier. So we stretched that as far as we possibly could. I'm really sorry. That's it.
And you know what? We went in with the end of next year. So that was what we were thinking, particularly for the full grants, that it would take perhaps a year to mature a full grant. Not that £3.5 is megabucks, but yeah, that was the latest date they would push. It's the first no. Sorry, folks. So Martin Wiley, will you be able to adjust the split between micro and full grants depending on the demand for each? You know what? I was just thinking about that as we put this fund together. It's really interesting. Interesting thought. Yeah, if one is done less and one is done more, we'll have to review really how we use the money. But part of me thinks, you know, this briefcase full of 140 grand is for you folks. So let's make it work for where the need is.
An issue more than a question. We discussed the lack of capacity within groups, recognising that transition towns are a bottom-up network. Is there some idea that there might at some stage be central support for some activities? Ooh, I think, Adrian, you might need to unmute and tell us. I don't really understand your question. Could you explain?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, we were discussing the fact that as in our two instances, there's a group of people that are involved in transition towns and lots of other local activities. And they're the same people involved in 4 or 5 different groups. So, you know, for example, I've got 3 Zooms I could have gone to this evening. Mm-hmm. And so you've got that weariness. Is there a way in which, not necessarily this fund, but there can be some sort of centralised support, perhaps on regions, to do general sort of admin? I mean, I've got a call tomorrow morning to go through our Memon Arts of Association. I really don't want to be doing that.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'll speak to that.
Thanks.
In terms of funds to support centralised stuff, I mean, that's kind of a glorious unknown, but I think the spirit of this project for me, coming in as a project worker, as a freelancer to work with Transition Network on this, is very much to stimulate conversation, connections, towards what support structures might be in the future for the scene in England and indeed beyond, you know, on this glorious island in the Atlantic that we live. Now, the funded and resourced support for that, after this project is completed at the end of March, at the moment, there is no resource for it. So what happens after March is unknown. Now, we are working on that in terms of the people who are behind this project to try and generate more resource for activity across Britain, which might well partly call to what you're talking about. But that's unknown and unpredictable as to when that will come. So I, for one, am very interested in the conversation in a true transition spirit from the grassroots. How can we kind of marry those two approaches together? One, an organizational approach to get resource in order to unlock capacity to develop the England and Britain scene, and the other being who's interested in that, who maybe has capacity or skills within the scene who could help with that movement and that conversation. So I think that's where it's at. It's kind of partly up to us, and hopefully some support and resource will come to support that too. And in London, we have a hub structure in London. Joe Dugan's on this call, Nick Arnim, Hilary Jennings, bunch of us who are kind of holding the middle of that. So in terms of something that and it definitely doesn't do what you're specifically asking about, but it does do some of that sharing and support and joining up to make a bigger picture and creating a feeling of possibility going forward. So there's a little bit of learning there, and indeed there's other networks around. The Herefordshire Green Network have been doing great work in that way for 8 or 9 years, and I bet across the 53 people on this call still, we will know networks that do that support regionally and locally. That may call to what you're asking for. So there's a slightly longer answer to the lovely question. I love the question though.
Okay, 9 minutes and 24 questions, Richard. There's a question about what about funding to create a housing cooperative? I mean, it sounds exciting, and tell us about it. And if these small grants can help, tell us how they can help. Could general capacity support be used towards paying a coordinator to help deliver projects in the coming year? Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. Will there be a space to share project ideas that have worked for other groups to get inspiration? Ooh, I bet that Richard and Rhiannon will be on that. I think they'll be loving doing that.
That is absolutely part of the sharing what you're doing. Sharing project ideas that will work for the groups to get inspiration. Yeah, I think it's a conversation that we're coming up to now. Like, what platforms can we make within the capacity we have in order for the scene to talk across and share all that inspiration and greatness. Yeah, it's a really good one. We're really working on that, particularly for the What Next Summit, thinking of fringe spaces where transition groups can connect alongside what will be a program summit at the end of February. So maybe that's also for there. Let's see, but yeah, definitely on our mind. You on the next one?
Could we buy land with the fund? I mean, there's no reason why not. Tell us why that's going to build the community resilience that you need. And then there's a nice one about love to see whether there's any synergies between grant applications in different areas. Can we keep an overview of all the cool stuff and try to draw groups together to collaborate and share practices and power? I'm sure we will be looking out really intelligently for this stuff. We're going to ask you questions, and if there's something going on that needs to know about each other, we will definitely try and put you in touch. Is there any disadvantage to waiting until the end of November? No, we won't be looking at them until it's the 1st of December. So no, there's no disadvantage.
Thank you from Kate. Thank you very much, Kate. Diane, perhaps a bid for a stage 1 of a project that could be completed by September. Yeah. Again, if it calls to the things we're putting out on the fund, then yeah, absolutely. Tell us about it.
There's a mini project starting here about Library of Documents of Association, which I don't think is a question for us about seed funding, but it's very interesting. We'll
dig out these wonderful thoughts about that Paul has shared and others have shared. We'll dig them out and get back to you about them so we can develop them further and see what capacity we have to put behind them.
Will funding be based on priorities like sustainable longevity? I mean, we've shared with you the criteria that we are going to consider each one against, and I don't think that was one of them. So, you know, I guess the answer's no.
Yeah. No, Joe Dugan just sharing the London group there and the Transition Southeast Facebook group. So if that's of interest, if you're close, the Southeast stuff shared on that as well as London stuff. So check out that. You're welcome to join from other parts of the country just to have a nosy as well.
So you asked us to prioritise our projects. How do we do this? On the each application form, one of the questions says, which priority level is this project? So you can apply for a project and tick first priority for that one, and then you can start a new form with the second project and write second priority in that one. I hope that makes sense.
Right, we are getting down. There's lots of sharing going on in the chat as well, which is really cool. So if you're comfortable sharing your contacts and want to keep in touch with someone in the open chat there, then please go ahead and do so, and we'll just try and.
Oh, well, maybe there's no more questions. Are there any more questions? I think I've got lost in the chat.
I don't think there are. So maybe just take a moment. We're 5 to 9 here, and just yeah, that invitation to share contacts if that's will help you connect with somebody. But also just take a moment to think about if any other questions are emerging. We kind of flew through that with good speed.
There's a nice one. Can transition groups come together for a regional project, thereby increasing the amount that can be bid for? Oh, Richard, someone's trying to twist our rules. What do we say?
It's a really interesting one, you know. Totally excited by the idea of transition groups coming together and more kind of regional work.
We might have to take that into some sort of email conversation, because we don't know the answer to that one, I don't think.
Yeah, we don't know the answer to that one. That's the straight rule, but I'm really excited by the idea.